Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to give people a few more minutes to dial in, so we'll get started momentarily. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our spring cleaning webinar. Before we begin, I'm just going to take a couple minutes to review a few housekeeping items so that you are all aware. First, everyone will remain on mute for the duration of the call. In addition, we also are going to encourage you to ask questions by submitting them via the question box, which is located on the GoToWebinar control panel at the bottom on the right-hand side. Sam will be able to follow up with any of you who have questions after the webinar directly, so please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the duration of the webinar. We will also be sharing a recording of today's session along with Sam's slides following the webinar, so you'll have access to those in the coming days. But for now, I would like to turn it over to Sam Purchase, who is a solutions architect here at Tungsten, to kick us off. Sam?
Thank you. So, hello everybody. My name's Sam Purchase, as we mentioned, and I am going to let you see who I am before we talk about the session. So, thank you for joining me on this Friday of what's probably been, I imagine, an interesting week for everybody. Probably lots of people learning to work from home a little bit more, like I am. And so, what we're going to be talking through today is really, we're talking about what we call string cleaning, but what we're going to be looking at is straight-through processing. Actually, what we are going to have in the session is a little bit of a interactive element where I'll be asking you to log on to your website called Slido, where you can go there, enter the code, and then you'll be prompted to answer a few questions. We will actually get to see those results of Slido live, just so you can have an understanding of what your peers are doing, just to help define around a few of the things of straight-through processing. So, but just to kick off as part of an introduction, I'm just going to show you a brief video of who Tungsten are, just so you get a better understanding. But the whole of this session is not so much talking about who Tungsten are, but actually it's more of a general session of thinking how we can help with straight-through processing, which I will explain in a little bit. So I'm just going to jump on, let you see the video, and then we'll begin the session. So that was just a brief introduction of who tungsten are, and just to give you a bit of an idea of kind of that background. Now, it's a Friday, and you may have heard the term life hacks before, and that's very much where I got the inspiration for this talk. And I think, you know, some of these life hacks, they're quite funny things, but also, you know, sometimes the smallest thing can actually make quite a big difference, quite an incremental change. So the whole concept of a hack is just something that's very simple, but actually it makes, I love this thing, makes life easier or more efficient. So what we're going to have a look at that is some for straight-through processing, some for AP, but actually I'm just going to give you just a few more general life hacks so that, you know, it's really important for me that you actually go away with actually learning something from this session. So if we just, this is one of my favorites, that, you know, lasting for 15 minutes has the same health benefits of getting 2 extra hours sleep. So if you're sort of, I would say, you know, on a night out or something and you're wondering, should I go home, etc., all you got to make sure you do is in that little bit of time, laugh another 15 minutes, and you can stay up for those 2 extra minutes more. Sort of on the theme of sleep, so probably a lot of us are working from home now, and it's been probably quite a tiresome week for a lot of people, and there's the magic numbers of what's the right kind of nap you should do. Definitely you don't want to hit that 60-minute phase. And also, you know, this is spring cleaning, so I thought we'd make sure that we'd have some kind of a hack, some kind of a tip. You know, if you've got some smelly shoes, just pop a tea bag in them and magically they'll be all right. Then this one, so this one is usually fairly controversial. Apparently wearing a red shirt makes women find you more attractive if you're a man. I don't know if anyone noticed on their webcam, I did have my red shirt on, so hopefully that is working today, and it makes it quite easy for me to know what I should be wearing when I'm doing this session. And then finally, the sort of the last life hack is, and this is a really good one, is eating chocolate while studying helps the brain retain more information. So, you know, while you're watching this webinar, if you need to have something to eat or pop off and get a chocolate bar, you're completely allowed to, because actually it's going to mean that what I'm talking about today is really going to stick in your head a lot more. So, you know, I'm giving you permission to eat chocolate during this session, which hopefully is something that's really nice for everyone to hear. So, sort of jumping on to more of the topic before we look at some of the hacks that I've come about, I think it's useful to set a bit of a baseline. And straight-through processing is a bit of a term that gets put around a lot, and we hear quite a lot of talk about it. We hear a lot of people talking about world-class straight-through processing, but I think it's useful actually taking a step back and thinking what we actually mean by straight-through processing. It's one of those terms that actually, when we look out there, people may call it auto posting, they may call it touchless. And what we're going to have a look at is just do a few things, a little bit of audience participation. So we're going to use a tool called Slido. So in your web browser, if you go along to slido.com, you'll be presented with a screen and it'll ask you to enter a code. So if you enter the code W868 as on the screen, and don't worry, it will be popping up on the screen in a minute, then we can have a look and we can ask a few questions and see what the audience actually think, what they think straight-through processing is. So first sort of question, which I think is quite a nice one to open up, is what does straight-through processing means to you? And I'll give everyone a few minutes to actually get onto Slido to actually start putting in some of the answers. And then we'll just have a look and start seeing actually what the audience thinks, what they think straight-through processing means to them. Brilliant. So we're seeing some of these answers coming in. I think if we're having a look, there's one kind of very, very large theme. So why these results are coming in, this is what we call a thought bubble. So the more people that write these terms actually comes through you know, we start seeing that. We also start seeing some interesting words coming up. So payment, that's quite a nice thing to actually start thinking about. You know, is that the end of a straight through process? Touchless we've seen again coming through. So just looking in, I think that gives some sort of interesting thoughts. And we've run these sessions before. And actually, it's quite interesting when we talked to everybody in the room that some people had very much a different definition of what straight through processing meant to them. So I think that's quite a good starting point. And now if we just jump on to the next question. So obviously, alongside your straight through processing definition, just let us know what you think your straight through processing rate is. And just do it against your definition. We'll have a little think about what that actual definition is afterwards. And then we'll start having a look at kind of the results so you can kind of see where your peers are at. Oh, here we go. So it's a little bit like the races here to see. So we're seeing quite low rates of people getting less than 20%. And if we're sort of looking back at the results we had there before, I think it's fair for us if we start saying that, you know, we're going to have a bit of an assumption that that's less than 20% of your invoices are actually being processed straight through. So we'll just give that a few more seconds to see if anyone else wants to vote. Again, when we share the slides afterwards, I've got the results of these, so happy to share them with everyone else so you get an idea of what they're doing there. And then finally, I think just to sort of frame up the conversation and just to give you some thought before, what's your biggest barrier to straight through processing? So what is the thing that stops you being able to perform straight through processing for AP? So again, this is your opportunity to share in public the things that cause you those problems. PDFs. That's a good, interesting one. I like that. Oh, procurement. So definitely the thing of people struggling with things upstream. And again, with these barriers as well, you can put in as many answers as you want as well. So if you want to do multiple answers, it is something that you can do. Oh. Portals, mini management processes, perfect. So yeah, so I think some sort of interesting results. If we just have a flick back through and kind of, I'm going to sort of summarize this a little bit. We can see that, I mean, if we look at as a group what we've come up as a definition, I would say that's pretty good one, which is straight through touchless processing. So for me, if we are talking about straight through processing, I think it's quite clear that actually that should be a AP process where a supplier sends an invoice and there's physically no touch at all, and there's no touch at all till that payment's made. So I think that's a very important definition, and obviously generally I guess most of the audience here are from AP, but also, you know, we're trying to expand this definition out as far as possible, and quite often we see Treasury involved as well slightly before payment runs are raised. So it's quite an interesting philosophical thought of, you know, does straight through processing, is it all the way to being ready to pay, or are you tracing it all the way to the payment? So that's probably something to just think about as part of your definition. If we look at the straight through processing rates of the participants of the call, we can see that they're pretty low. I mean, you would expect that, as this is a webinar about what is the biggest barrier to straight through processing and us trying to help fix that or provide you some ideas and suggestions. But again, we're seeing that even though we hear lots of companies with very high straight through processing rates up in the 90s, what we would consider world class, I think it's fair to say that not everybody out there in the world is experiencing that. And then if we have a look back, we can actually see and remember these words get bigger the more it's said, we actually see that there's not actually too many consistent themes here. I think if we look at that, we can see that everybody has slightly different problems that creates those issues for doing straight through processing. But I think one of the good things here is if we're looking at that, there's probably a bit of a theme around, I guess PAR is meant to be paper, is about process. So we're talking about process, procurement, stages, but also we're looking at about the quality of invoice data. So we've got PDFs, missing data, portals, etc., etc. So hopefully that's just given you some sort of food for thought of what your peers are having in terms of issues around that problem and what we actually think P2P is as a definition. So what I'm now going to do is just go through and show you, we ran a similar workshop session at our event called Insights. And actually, again, we're still seeing that same theme of straight-through processing rates being very low. What does straight-through processing mean? No manual intervention for the invoice. So again, we're on quite a similar definition. And then actually, if we looked at the people that were in that room, again, I would say that we've got a vast array of options. So there's not one single barrier people are having to getting good STP rates, but probably the one that jumps out there is people involved in the process. So just to sort of share the whole results of what we did before, that's bringing it together as some context. And as Emma mentioned, we'll share this deck with you so you can use that in any future thing. So let's go and have a look at some of my hacks. And this is where I have to admit something. So yes, my surname is Purchase, and just a little bit of my background. I have worked in purchasing, finance. I've been a large supplier. My first job was actually in purchasing. So I did get people ringing up going, do you really work in purchasing? You know, is this Sam Purchase in purchasing? And then unfortunately, if I was destined to do it, my initials are actually STP. So my name is Sam Thomas Purchase. So hopefully some of the hacks, some of the ideas I'm going to share with you coming up in this session actually means that, you know, they're really, really going to help you. So of all the people sort of over the last 15 years where I've been talking to various people, I mean, I think this was one that really sort of is a very, very common theme. And I think this is a very, very simple hack that you can really think about bringing. So I'd say actually just Google, you know, Google invoice charter, you know, that's something. One of the sort of key things I've seen where people have increased their straight-through processing rates, and as I said, I've been on the supply side of things for quite a few years as well. Actually, if you just, as a simple document, you know, this is something that's in your control, you can go away and do this fairly easily. If you have a single document that makes it very clear to suppliers what they need to send on an invoice, sometimes it can make a supplier's life so much easier. It could be you've got a fairly complex customer structure, you know, you've got lots of different business units, supplier never needs to send it. Also, you know, you have to be realistic. So if you're sending purchase orders out that are a single line for something horrendously complicated. So in my experience, we had single line POs for stuff that said data center. If you can just imagine how many bits and services there are in a data center from a supplier, that's an absolute nightmare to actually be able to invoice and wrap that back up. So if you look at your POs you're sending out, and we had purchasing on there as some of the reasons, you know, you've got to give the supplier a chance that on their system they can actually send you an invoice back that's going to match and straight through. But also, you know, how do suppliers receive their POs? So when I was a supplier, I always was basically saw electronic purchase orders and electronic invoices coming very much together. So I would actually say that I wouldn't do electronic invoicing unless I had an electronic purchase order. So, you know, you will get suppliers like that. And that's, I think, because if we're looking at on stream, if you're making it clear to the supplier on the purchase order what they need to send, you're delivering it to them electronically, so it's broke down and it's in and easy to, you know, you're removing that paper process for a supplier to type a PO into their system. Remember, if you're what you're doing from an AP perspective, an invoice into the system, the likelihood is a salesperson who's basically trying to do the same thing, getting it into their system, and then having that invoice charter document, just a very, very simple, easy thing to do that anyone could go away and do next week. Having a document to say, we need to put these things on an invoice. You invoice this part of the company for this. These are very, very simple things that actually can make a real difference. So that's kind of my first hack, is just, think about suppliers, but just try and think about how you can make life clear to them what they need to send. So my next rule, or my next hack, is, just thinking about, you're probably going to have to buy, as a company, lots and lots and lots and lots of different things. So many times when I go out and see people and talk about what they do, they have blanket type rules for the kind of spend that they're doing. So, I talk to people that have 0 tolerance price rules, but also will have blanket rules to say, no, we have 5% tolerance on everything. And just actually think about what's being bought, what invoices there are, what types of invoices are coming in. Is that really going to work? And one of the things is, like I said, that I've spent some time, I used to work in procurement. Of one of the things, I think, if you're thinking of a sort of an easy way of start splitting out that, most procurement departments will have, a categorization of the kind of spend they're doing. Maybe start thinking about, your invoices coming in by that spend type. So I've got the example here of, just have a think, do you need to freeway match services? Is a service, buying something of a service, is that really the same as you buying nuts and bolts? But you can use that category structure that procurement are using, and just take a look at that and just start thinking about the invoices you get in for those categories. And you may be using bulk purchase orders for services. Are the rules that you've got set up, is the way that you're treating those invoices in from a matching process, does it make sense that you're treating all of those things the same? Do you have the opportunity to start thinking about the type of spend, the type of invoices coming in? Could you make some tweaks? And one of the sort of big things about those hacks, and why we call this a hack, is, sometimes a small incremental change can make a real big difference. So just picking, you may pick one category. You may want to just change the rules on that if you can, just to have a little look to see, is that going to make a difference? And do that small incremental change, use that as a test to see if it makes a difference, and then think about, could you actually bring that out to a wider audience, more invoices, etc., etc. So my hack 2 is just try and think about different types of suppliers, different spend types, and are the rules you're applying, does it really work for all of those? Now, on to hack 3. So this is probably one of the banes of my life, and especially when we go in to see a lot of people. The fact is, I still go in and see people who cannot process invoices, are having to make changes to invoices for issues with unit of measure. So a unit of measure is basically, the simple one here, we've got piece, we've got each, it's what you're buying. Yes, if you're buying things in weights, the classic one of kilograms, and, you send out a purchase order for kilograms, then your supplier sends one in for tons, or they send them in pounds. Those things are probably a little bit more difficult, but we also see many, many times very, very simple things that a purchase order goes out, the unit of measure is each. You then get a supplier send an invoice in, his unit of measure is piece. Piece and each is fundamentally the same thing, but you get lots of people there then fixing those bits there. So it's a really, really, really daft reason for not doing straight through processing. So there are ways out there that you can do mappings to say that if someone sends piece, please default it to each. Most ERPs, most systems have a default unit of measure. So, you can set rules in for inbound invoices to say, if there's no unit of measure, put each in as a default, and straight away you're going to be fixing a lot of that invoice data. And then finally, the last one is, is it really reasonable to expect, say, you've got someone who's doing a piece of contracting or someone, a florist, is it really reasonable to expect them to actually know what to put down for a unit of measure? It's not always the most obvious thing. And especially, say, if we go for the sort of the most basic form of an invoice, if you looked at a handwritten invoice, nobody is going to write each on a unit of measure. So this is where actually getting those kind of invoices, those supplies to use a portal, things like that, that the fact that, they're presented with, you need to provide a unit of measure, and also the fact that they're provided by, the words to say this is an each, this is a weight, etc., etc. It's a good way to educate those vendors to actually get it right. And if we, again, just sort of bringing in bit of a procurement there's been a big trend in procurement for what people would call guided procurement. So that's the whole idea that if someone's buying something, a system guides them to get stuff right. Actually, if you look what AP have had for years, and portals have been around for a long, long time, actually portals in effect is guided invoicing for smaller suppliers. It guides them to complete the right information. So if you are thinking about routes for those kind of supplies coming in, actually the portal approach of actually being able to put an invoice into a system is actually a real benefit for those smaller suppliers. And the way you communicate that to them as well makes a real big difference. So that's kind of my hack around unit of measure. Again, just as a simple takeaway, check to see if you've got a default unit of measure in your ERP that goes probably out on some of your purchase orders. Just have a look to see if you get some invoices in with silly things like piece instead of each. That will give you a very, very quick win. Then my last one, which is, sorry, not my last one, hack 4. So this one is actually, it's a little bit more about actually thinking about how you use straight-through processing as a KPI within the business. So straight-through processing, often lots and lots of businesses have it as a KPI. They want to get it as high as possible because it's a good measure of efficiency. One of the things I would say is you need to really be able to help improve that. Think about when we had that on some of the results from the survey, is the fact that actually a lot of the things that are going to cause you problems are upstream. We had procurement, we had P2P, we had poor process. Getting them involved or interested in straight-through processing can be quite a hard thing to do sometimes. So actually, if you can provide the information to procurement when they're talking to their suppliers, if they've got things like category reviews, etc., make sure that they show actually what things aren't getting processed. They might go in there and moan, oh, I'm never getting paid on time. Actually providing purchasing with that ammunition to have that discussion, even if it's the end of the meeting, is a really great thing to do. Going on to that, and this is one of the things that, a few people in the session we did in London, they were like, oh, I like that one, is the fact that, linking terms with the ability to do STP. You shouldn't be giving someone really, really good terms if they actually send you invoices that are horrendous and cause you lots of problems. So actually sending some benchmarks and those gates to basically link those terms to straight-through processing is something that, really motivates both sides of the conversation. And then also it's trying to get someone from procurement involved in actually anything to do with STP. So it's getting that champion involved in that process. And one of the sort of nice philosophical things that I think we talked about in the session, and actually I've probably talked about it 4 times this week, is STP as a KPI is good, but it's very, very focused. Now, one of the things where I've seen that actually the end-to-end efficiency of P2P, or actually source to pay, has become one of the really, really inefficient companies, is actually raising that KPI up a level. So one of the examples I use is for Amazon. So, and Amazon have had this for years, and they had something called a perfect order percentage. And Amazon basically linked a load of KPIs together, and they came up with them for a perfect definition for them for an order. But if you make this and think about this from an STP perspective, you know, let's just play it through. We're going to make sure that it was sourced. We may have had an e-sourcing event. We're going to make sure there's a contract. We want someone to raise a purchase order. It should be from a catalog. They should send an electronic invoice. That electronic invoice should be straight through processed. And also then you should pay on time. And straight away, that's our definition of a perfect order. And by rating those KPIs, which actually out in the business, you're probably looking at all those KPIs already, by bringing them together into a single KPI at a high level, not only are you bringing departments together, but also you're being able to highlight. So let's say we've got bad e-invoicing and there's no purchase order sent. We show those two elements there. We've got really bad rates there. That then has the knock-on effect that we can't do straight through processing. And actually, it's a very good way of actually showing the performance of a company from a P2P, S2P perspective, but also it allows you to show the impact that other areas are having from a KPI perspective on things like straight through processing, paid on time, etc., etc. So that's just a little bit of thought to show that, you know, we've got these KPIs, they're great, but could you raise them up a level, wrap them into something bigger? Because then wrapping it into that bigger is going to help you have bigger impact within the organization. And finally is the good old, what I call the sting in the tail. So, you know, we talk about a lot of these things and we want to get great straight through processing rates, etc., etc. But, you know, you probably have, you know, when we talk about straight through processing, when we talk about AP and invoicing, the 20-80 rule probably always works. So 20% of your suppliers are going to be 80% of your invoices, and then 80% of your suppliers are going to be that 20%. By tackling this tail, you know, the tail spend that you've got, this long chain of suppliers are probably going to be the hardest one to work. So just think about those suppliers maybe slightly differently. So just some real simple, you know, PO convert, PO flip processes. If you link that to any kind of contingent labor, contractors, etc., that's generally quite a nice process you can wrap up. So you can wrap up the fact they get the POs, they're used to POs, they convert the PO on a system, and then you get that invoice in. Then, you know, you probably are going to get some paper and handwritten invoices out there. But the one thing I would say is, you know, you're probably then going to have to use some kind of OCR technology to capture them in. But the one thing, and I would say, is just always do it at line level. You know, people capturing OCR details at header level just causes so many downstream problems that it isn't worth it. Just make sure you always try and capture that data at line level. And then probably the last one, which kind of just sort of link into a story, is just kind of understand, you know, how suppliers are selected, how people are there, because it's about sometimes setting expectations within the business. So quite a few times I've spoke to businesses and they have to deal a lot with government. And generally, actually, when you're dealing with government, you will have terms written in your contracts that you have to use a certain percentage of small businesses. It may be veterans in the US, things like that. And generally, you know, you might not know about that with AP, that someone's sold something, then you're doing some stuff, then you're forced to use a certain type of supplier. And that type of supplier, it may be a very, very small supplier. It may also mean you're going to get loads and loads of one-time suppliers. So really, the thing of just have a bit of discussion maybe about how suppliers get selected upstream, because you don't want to be, I mean, we see all these things of, and even in my Slido we had it, that, you know, we expect business is to be doing 90% straight through processing. You know, that's what we consider world class. Yet everyone on here said they were 0 to 20%. I think just having a bit of an upstream discussion of finding out why you have those suppliers, just don't beat yourself up. If you find out that you have to use a load of SMEs and you're not going to get those 90% straight through processing rates, or it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to do. So maybe it's about setting those expectations up to senior people that are going, well, why can't we get this? If you can articulate the reason we can't, and it's part of the way our business works, that's generally something to help. And I just don't want people to go away thinking that, you know, we're not at 90%, we're not doing a very, very good job. Because sometimes, due to the nature of the business, getting to 50% means you've actually done a great for you job for straight through processing. So those were my 5 hacks. Just, you know, I just wanted to give some thoughts about how you can actually sort of get them into the business. So if you're going to do sort of 3 key things, you know, I would try and track them as some form of a KPI. Talk about socializing the importance. So it is a subject that the more you talk about it within the business, I hope more people get involved. And that's why I also say this term about, you know, it's good to involve those upstream actors, you know, get those people involved, talk about it a lot, make it something that you talk about in your business all the time. Then get your suppliers involved and work through some specific scenarios with them. So I talked about, you know, contingent labor, etc., etc. You know, maybe pick a set of suppliers that buy a certain type of thing and actually try and do something different and have that as a small scenario, a specific case, to see if you can improve your straight through processing rates. And then finally, just, you know, I would say this is an open invitation. You know, if you want some help, if you want to see any of these areas here or any of the things, you know, we're here to help. If you're an existing customer, or if you're a new customer, or if you're a prospect, just talk to us, because, you know, this is what we live and breathe all the time, and we've seen many, many customers across the piece. So just come and talk to us and ask us. So that's my summary, is just, you know, my ask is you pick something to go and do and just have a go and try and make a difference to how much you can do your straight through processing. So that's really just the end of the session. As Emma said, if we've got any questions and that, please pop them in the chat and we'll be happy to take them away later. I'd say thank you for everybody attending and putting in that input into Slido. I think it helps a lot with the session for us to understand that. And just really is sort of a bit of a thing. Obviously, we've got Corona going on in the world at the moment, and it's probably quite a nice thing that we've managed to have 40 minutes without us talking about the coronavirus. So hopefully that's been a little bit of a nice break. But just to say that actually we've got a session coming up next week of how we think that we can help with, or just some hints and tips and a similar sort of thing of how we can help with coronavirus, and just to see, you know, the impact that's had on AP and AR departments working remotely. So just, it's basically an open invite to say, if you want to come to that session, please join that session, and we'll hopefully have a good discussion to help with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. What I can do actually is I will include the link to next week's webinar when we send around the recording and slides in the coming days. So thanks again for joining, and we'll be in touch soon. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.